you doing? I'm CK with Under Pressure Performance, and today we're going to be showing you how to install one of our twin turbo kits on a C5 Corvette. Now this is going to incorporate all of our latest revisions in that with the bigger turbos and the 3-inch downpipes. So we'll go ahead and get started on it and show you how to get done. Alright, one of the things we're going to be doing is going to be relocating the battery to the trunk. Now since the trunk is predominantly electronically actuated, first thing we're going to do is actually pop the trunk, and then we're going to go ahead and just use some rags. We'll fold them up and put them over the latch spots. That way, when we close the trunk, it doesn't actually close all the way. This is going to give us access to get in here later on so we don't accidentally close the trunk. That way, once we've disconnected the battery and we're locating it to the rear, we're not locked out of the trunk and you don't have to climb through the inside. The first piece we're going to start with the mock-up is going to be our up pipe. This basically, the 3-bolt flange will bolt right to the header that's in the car, the manifold. This is going to cross over underneath the body, and this should be tucked up tight and basically touching against the body. Don't worry if it is touching, it's not going to rattle. We're actually bolting it to the body over here anyway. So it is supposed to be tucked up really, really tight across the bottom of the car. And then the turbo is going to mount over here. This bracket will actually bolt it up to the frame. But this is going to be one of the last things that we do is actually locating this bracket. We need to make sure everything fits in there and go through final adjustment and make sure everything's tweaked and perfect before we actually mount that up. All of these flanges and bolt hole locations and V-bands have a little bit of, rotatability and play, plus the flex section. There's some movement in this kit. That helps it install and fit better because if any of the cars are slightly different, there's a little bit of variance, it gives you the ability to adjust and work around it. However, with all of this adjustability, it also gives you the ability to rotate it and put it into positions where it doesn't fit very well. So the most important thing and the hardest thing is getting everything in there to fit perfectly before we drill this hole. This will be the last thing that we do as far as the fitment of the hot pipe itself to make sure that this fits in there perfectly. Alright, now over here on the driver's side, in order to clear a little bit of room, it's got this crossbar that goes up in here. We're going to go ahead and cut that out. It's easiest just to use a Sawzall, trim that out, and that's going to get that out of the way, so it gives us a lot more of a pocket to put the turbo in. We're actually going to go ahead and do that on both sides here, so we'll do it on the other side once we get to it. And then we're going to do some clearancing underneath here. We'll show you in just a second for the downpipe. Alright, now as we look up from the bottom, we're going to have this edge right here on both sides that sticks out as it comes down here. The downpipe is going to cross over right in this area here. So you can see what we did is we put a series of slits and cuts into it. Going into it, basically just cutting it like this. And then we fold it back up over. So that way we're actually not cutting that pinch weld or that seam off. We're just going to basically fold it back up in to this area here. That's going to give enough clearance room for the downpipe to come right through here. And here you can see it from the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and do that to both sides now. So you can see we've already got this side done. And we'll go ahead and come over and trim this side next. And we're going to do it the exact same way. Alright, now when we go to put the up pipe on, we're going to reuse the factory gasket. And that's important to make sure that this gasket is in good condition, as well as it's got these little tabs on here. You want to kind of bend them back out. This should seat up into the header or into the manifold and stay up in there with ease. Occasionally we'll see if these are not seated in there properly, they will actually twist around in here, or if they're corroded and decomposing, they'll actually break apart and then they'll go through the up pipe and into the turbo. That, of course, will destroy the turbo. So you want to make sure you've got good gaskets. If you're in question on them at all, replace them with another OEM gasket. But this is going to allow the up pipe to bolt right to the manifold, and then the 3-bolt flange will come up and actually tighten against it. And this again has some mobility here. It's actually a ball and socket style flange. So there is going to be a little bit of adjustability with the up pipe like this as well. Alright, now over here on the passenger side, we're going to go ahead and clear out room and make room for the turbo setup. So you can see we've taken the ECU that was mounted down here along with all the wiring, and we pulled it up through this cubby hole. For the time being, we're just going to kind of set it right across up here out of the way, and we just got it kind of pulled out of the way. That way we can get the turbo in there. Once we get the turbo and everything mounted, we'll go ahead and back and remount all that stuff, so that way we can kind of have an idea of where all the hot spots for the turbo and the downpipe and that are going to be. We also went ahead and the battery tray that's here, there's a plastic tray that sits actually on top of this post, and it's got the 4 bolts on the inside. You want to take that out, and then we're going to cut the tray mount or the battery mount itself out, which is going to be this guy here. That's going to open up this frame rail and give us some more room in here. There's also the crossbar that goes from here down, but from the firewall piece down to the little square tube. We went ahead and cut that out. The evap canister and that, we'll go ahead and pull that off. We're going to remove that, as well as the drain tube that just comes up from the cowl and this is just for draining water down to keep it out of the way. So we're going to open up this whole area here. That was going to give us a lot more access. Now we're also going to have to trim away some of the panels in here to account for the turbo. So what's best to do is what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mount the up pipe in there. We'll go ahead and bolt up the 3-bolt section where it goes over there, and we're just going to leave them snug at this point. We're not going to tighten them down. And then this bracket is going to come and mate up right here with the frame. So for the time being, what we're going to do, once we get it kind of in alignment where everything looks straight and nice in there, we're going to use a sheet metal self-tapping screw temporarily just to put it in place. The reason we're using this is it makes a smaller hole. That way we're not drilling and tapping it. If we have to move it over slightly later, you don't want the hole already tapped, because the most important thing when mounting this is actually getting the location of this hole correctly. So we don't want to finalize that hole until we have the turbo and the downpipe and everything is sitting in here. That way if we have to make some adjustments a little bit forward or down or up or whatever, there's that adjustability in there. So we're just going to use, like I said, a sheet metal self-tapping screw for right now just to hold it in place. That'll give us a chance to mock everything up. Once we do that, then we'll do the final drill and tap on this bolt hole here. So we'll go ahead and get this mocked up in there now. We'll go ahead and stick the up pipe in there. We'll mount the turbo and then mount the down pipe. And right now we're just going to go ahead and loosely mount all those. Alright, now before we actually install the turbos, what we're going to do is go ahead and prep them so that way they're already ready for final install. So what we're going to do with that, on the 5871s, we're going to use a 5-bolt adapter. The bigger turbos are going to use the 4-bolt to V-band adapter. This basically just bolts right on the back side here. We are going to use a light layer of silicone to actually seal it up. And there is actually a separate hole right here for if you're using an internal wastegate, which we're not. You want to make sure you get a little bit of silicone right around that hole. Next, we're going to go ahead and loosen all 6 of these turbine bolts here and all 6 of these compressor bolts here. What that's going to allow us is for all 3 of these pieces to rotate independently. That way when we put it in, we can actually clock it. Because we're going to need the oil feed to be on the top and the oil drain to be on the bottom. And then we can also mount our compressor housing where it correctly lines up with our intercooler piping. Next, we're going to go ahead and install our oil feed, which for the 5871s is basically the 1/8" MPT to -4. For those of you guys using the 6182s and larger ones, the ball bearing turbos, they're going to have a brass oil restrictor that actually restricts the oil supply since they're ball bearing turbos going in. For you guys using the journal bearing turbos, you do not want to use an oil restrictor. It will starve the turbo of oil. Then on the bottom side here, where the 2-bolt flange is, we have a 2-bolt to -10 adapter along with this gasket. We're going to go ahead and bolt that on there. That's going to be our oil return. That way everything's already bolted up in there. And when we put the turbo and mount it up in there, we can kind of see and get everything orientated as far as where it needs to be. Alright, now you can see we've got it mocked up in here. So we're going to check for clearances on a few things. We want to make sure it's not actually rubbing up against anything. Predominantly the tire. We're going to make sure we've got it pushed back and tighten up against the frame rail here where you're not going to be contacting the tire. So what we'll do is we'll put the rim on here, we'll turn it full lock both directions, make sure it's not going to hit. You should end up with about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of clearance on there. If it does look close where you might need to readjust it, we recommend put the car back down on the ground so it actually loads the weight on the tires. That way it gets it in line with where it's actually going to be when it's on the ground. But basically we just mocked it up in here. Now we went ahead and for the time being we put an oil line on very loosely. That way we can see that we're getting our geometry of the line correct where it's going to be coming out the bottom. And we'll also go ahead and test fit up, make sure we have enough clearance room behind it for the oil line behind the wastegate here. That's going to allow us to make sure that we have the center section of the cartridge in place where it's completely vertical and everything's going to clear. We're not going to be hitting T3 flanges or wastegates or anything like that. So what we can do at this point is we'll go ahead and lock a couple of these bolts down for the center section to the turbine housing. That way that stays in place. For the time being, we're going to leave the compressor housing here loose though, so that way we can rotate it. Once we get into the intercooler piping, we'll be able to mate it up and make sure it mates exactly with the intercooler piping, and then we'll lock that down. Once we get done doing that, we'll go ahead and pull the assembly back off, seal everything up with silicone, make sure it's all tight, and put it on for the final assembly. Alright, now over here on the driver's side, we're going to do the same thing as we did on the passenger side. We're going to go ahead and get this ready and get it mocked up. So we're going to come in here, we're going to trim out some of the fiberglass. Depending on the size of the turbo that you're using will dictate how much you need to cut out. But we're going to try and leave as much in there as we can, like the mount point here for the fender, as well as some of these mounting points for the wheel well liner that's going to go back in here. The cross-sectional bar, the square tube, again, that was on here, just like on the other side, is going to get cut out. And we're basically going to come in here and clear out this area. And what we'll do next is we'll mock up this side with the up pipe, the turbo and the down pipe, just like we did on the other side. And again, we're going to use the self-tapping sheet metal screw. That way it's a smaller hole, and that kind of just gives us more room to move it around. Once we get it finalized and everything fits in there, then we'll go again and drill and tap it and actually final assemble it. Alright, now here you can see we've got the up pipe bolted up to the manifold, and it's still, we went ahead and snugged these up, but they're not tight all the way, so that way there is still some mobility room with this being a ball and socket. And what we're after is we want to tuck this up. It should be right up against here, going across the flex section. Will actually be barely touching the bottom panel of the car here, and that's going to shoot up over and around up into the fender well area. Alright, now onto the intercooler installing. What we're going to do is go ahead and slide the intercooler back up into just in front of the radiator here, and the intercooler is actually going to bolt with these two tabs on the bottom right to this cross-sectional bar here. So we're going to go ahead and line it up in place. Now we want to center it so it's side to side centered, and then what we'll go ahead and do is right where these two tabs are in these holes, we'll go ahead and mark it, and we're going to go ahead and drill right through the subframe here, and we're going to install an M6 40mm bolt with a nut and a washer on both sides. And that's going to actually secure the intercooler itself right up in here. And then our intercooler lines are going to be coming right out these sides here. So the horn assembly here we're going to go ahead and detach for right now. We're going to relocate that, and we'll show you where we put it later. On this side over here you have the air pump. This is part of the emission system in that. We're going to go ahead and just remove this and discard of it. And we'll get rid of this so that way it clears up this room so we can come right through here with our intercooler piping. Alright, now to lay out the intercooler piping, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hole saw a couple of holes in here so that we have some routing for it. So what we're after on this hole saw is we want to line it up so that way the bit is even with this right here. And then we're going to come in right here, and we want to cut between this outer edge and in between this bracket, because on the other side of this bracket, if you look over here, there's also a metal bracket. We want to make sure we're coming out on the outside of that there. Now we're going to use a 2.5-inch hole saw that's going to give us a little bit more flex room since we're only using 2-inch pipe. And then as we lay it out, you can see it's going to come right up through here. We're going to also go ahead and do the same thing right up here. We're going to cut out a hole, and then right back here. Let me lower it down so you can get a little better look at it. Now, same thing on this, same 2.5-inch hole. What we're doing with this is we're basically going to slide it as far forward right up to the edge of the fender here, the fiberglass piece that's sticking up, and we want to align it with right in line with the hole that we just did down here. Then we're going to come straight back, and we're going to do another hole saw hole right here on the side. Next thing we're going to do is we'll go ahead and mask these off. We're going to tape it between these two holes here for the outer edges, and we'll just use masking tape so that we have some kind of a guideline. And we're going to actually come back with the cutoff wheel and cut this section out, because one of our intercooler pipes is actually going to sit and lay down right inside of this here. Alright, now you can see we went ahead and cut it out, and basically again all we did was connect between the two holes that we made with the tape to act as our guidance, and then we cut out the center section here. The holes are basically just going to make it so that way it's oval and we have nice clean cuts on the ends, having it done with a hole saw that we're not having to grind it out. Now this piece is going to actually sit up in here, and the flange on it is going to sit towards the front, and that's going to come up and sit in here basically like that right there. And then we'll go ahead and connect everything up here, and we'll show you what it looks like once we're done. Alright, now for the intercooler piping here, you can see we're coming off the intercooler. We're coming off with the 2.5-inch to 2-inch reducing 45-degree angle coupler. That's going to go into our 14-inch long straight aluminum pipe here. And we're going to kick that back at just a little bit of an angle. Then it's going to go into our 60-degree coupler here. Then the fender section is the one with the bracket and the brace on it. That's going to sit right down into our cutout that we cut out earlier. Now this bracing here, we want to be, if you look at this corner right here, it almost draws a little point. We want the back edge of that to be about even with that right there. So that'll give you kind of a justification as far as which direction, front or back, it's going with that. Then we're going to come back here to our 45-degree coupler. This is our 6-inch straight aluminum pipe, and then another 45-degree coupler into the turbo. Now for the guys using the bigger turbos and that's going to be the 2.5-inch to 2-inch 45-degree coupler. Start tightening up our hose clamps and that. This gives us a position to get everything on the turbo now clocked. We have the oil line drain coming out, so we have that side clocked, and we've got the intercooler, so we'll go ahead and lock all these bolts down, tighten them up. At that point, the turbo should be good. We can go ahead and pull it off, We'll go ahead and seal everything up on it permanently. We use a little bit of silicone for the T3 flange here, as well as for the backside, and then we'll go ahead and bolt everything up and permanently mount it in the car. This again was just basically mocking it up so we can get our layout of exactly where the turbo needs to be clocked to line up with our intercooler piping. From that point, like I said, we'll tear it off, we'll seal everything up, put it all back together, and we'll go ahead and final install on this. Alright, now the intercooler piping also is going to be the same on both sides, so it's symmetrical, it's going to be laid out the exact same, and all of the pieces are interchangeable. So the 6-inch pipe is interchangeable with the other side, the fender mounts, or the fender pipes are going to be interchangeable. Everything's actually the same on both sides, so basically when we go to lay out the driver's side, it's going to be identical to what we have over here. Alright, next we're going to go over the wastegate installation. Now it's fairly straightforward and simple. The wastegate does have a fire ring that's going to slide into the bottom of here. Now you notice it projects outward slightly from there. That's what it's supposed to do actually. So when you go to put it on, there is actually a little bit of play in it here. And when you go to put it on, you'll put it up into its housing here where it seats, and you're going to push on it and actually seat it while you clamp down the VBA clamps here on it. That's going to put pressure and make sure it's seated fully up against the actual valve in there. Now for these wastegates, they do have 2 upper ports here and 2 lower ports here and here. All we're going to be dealing with right now is going to actually be the lower port. If you are using a boost controller, especially the electronic boost controllers, some of those will use both the ports, but go ahead and consult your boost control manufacturer as far as how to hook that up. We're going to be doing just the most basic install, which is going to be the 7 PSI or the wastegate spring tension. So we're only going to be using one of the lower ports. So the other lower port we're going to need to plug on this thing. So what we're going to do is kind of mock it up and see. And on this one, the lower port, the inner one, it would be facing in towards the frame rail, and the outer one. So then this wastegate here, what we want to use is actually going to be the outer one here. And you can see as we set it up, we're put the nipple into the outer wastegate port here. The inner wastegate port on the lower section we need to plug. So we actually need to put the plug in it. Otherwise your boost will pretty much be infinite. There will be nothing to actually open the wastegate up. So we do have to plug off the lower port. Now the 2 upper ports here and here, for the time being, we're just going to go ahead and leave those open. Don't plug both of them. If you want to plug one of them because it's facing up and you're worried about getting dust or dirt or anything in there, that's fine. But you cannot plug both of them. It does come with 2 nipples, and you can put the other nipple on if you want. So that way you have 2 nipples, but we're not actually going to be hooking anything up to that nipple. Where, like I said, we're just doing the most basic, simple installation on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to route the vacuum line from the nipple on the lower port here. As you can see, and that runs right up to the brass fitting that's on the turbo there. And basically that's just going to provide the boost reference directly for that wastegate. And these are pretty much the same on both sides, except for the orientation as far as which port you're going to use is going to change. And they set it up that way. That way you can have multiple resources or multiple locations in case it's something like this where it's up against the frame rail. Now for the dump tube, it's pretty much going to be the same on both sides, and the dump tubes will be the same. We just want to bolt them on. It's just a straight dump tube, and then we're going to project it straight down, so that way it's going to vent the exhaust gases down, out, and underneath the car. For the upper intercooler piping, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's basically just going to go in between the intercooler and the throttle body, which is going to be the big 3.5-inch intercooler pipe here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and bolt the TurboSmart wastegate to it, or blow-off valve rather, to it. And again, that just basically goes on, clamps around it. Now there is an O-ring that goes in there. You want to make sure the O-ring seats down in there. Put the blow-off valve on, and then put the clamp on, and you can rotate it around. This one here also has a couple ports on it as well, depending on which way you're going to be orientating it to use it. One of the ports does need to be plugged, and the other port needs to get a nipple on it, and that's what's going to be our boost vacuum reference on that. Then we're going to use a 3-inch to 3.5-inch reducing coupler here. That's going to go on the turbo side. The UPP logo is going to be facing up and towards the front of the car. We're going to go to our reducer to go to our MAF. Now, depending on what year, you guys will have a little bit different reducers. Depending on what year your Corvette is, it'll have a different size MAF. And then last would be the 3.5-inch to 4-inch reducer that's going to go into the intake there. Now you can see on here, and it's the same way. This one has an aftermarket radiator, so it's a little bit higher. It'll be the same way on the stock radiator, though. We're actually going to be touching and contacting right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go ahead and use a cutoff wheel on either side of the intake pipe. We're going to place a little slice vertically here, and be real careful not to cut actually into the radiator. All we're trying to do is cut this top fin right here. And we're going to do it on both sides. So we're going to cut a slice here and here, and a slice here and here. And then we're going to actually take both those 2 that are facing upwards, and we're going to fold them over. So we're just going to bend this over so it's on top of itself. only in the section where the intake pipe is right there. So we'll go ahead and get that cut out and show you what that looks like once it's folded over, and then we'll show you what the intake pipe looks like once it's installed. Alright, now for the oil feed assembly, what we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to pre-assemble the assembly here first. A lot of times this will actually come put together or halfway put together. That's basically just on our end, making sure that all the parts are there. It is not sealed or Teflon tape, so and it won't be tight either. So what we're going to need to do is actually pull this all apart. We're going to Teflon tape all of these unions. Any of the unions that's NPT, it's National Pipe Thread, which looks like that, you will use Teflon tape on. Any of the fittings that are a flare or an AN JIC fitting, which is this, it's got the little flare on top, those you do not use Teflon tape on. Those are actually relying on the actual fitting itself to seat up against that flare. So any of the NPT fittings, we're going to go ahead and Teflon tape them, get them all sealed up, and we're basically making it look like this. So we have our oil feed block, comes into a 90, comes into a straight, and then it goes into our all-female T, and that's going to be facing up and down with the two 1/8-inch NPT to -4 fittings there. These are what's going to be actually feeding both of our turbos. And this oil feed block is going to go right down by the oil filter. You'll know that notice that there is a little plate down there, or those of you guys that have an oil cooler, you'll actually have lines that are running out from there. We're going to go ahead and unbolt that plate. This is going to bolt in, and then you're going to use 2 of the 40mm or M6 1.0 by 40mm bolts to bolt it up. Now for those of you guys that do have an oil cooler, which on the C5s was fairly rare, your bolts are going to be a little bit longer. You're going to need, I believe it was a 45 or a 50mm bolts that go in there. And this is basically just going to bolt up in line, and then that's where we get our oil feed for the turbos from, and we're going to run our oil lines from each of these to each of the turbos. Take 3. Alright, now here for the oil feed, just above the oil filter here, you could see our sandwich plate right in behind there, and that's again held in with the 2 M6 by 40mm bolts. The platelet is going to feed going forward, facing towards the front of the car, and then we've got the T that's going to face up and down. Now, each one of the legs off the T is going to be feeding one of the turbos, so it's pretty easy. You got the 135 facing on the bottom here, and that line is going to go up, and we're going to wrap that over the top of the transmission towards the passenger side. And then off the top of this one, we've got the 45, and that's just going to shoot right straight up here, right over the frame rail, and come out right here on the turbo. So the 90 degrees on both of them are going to be on the turbo side. The 135 and the 45 are going to be on the oil feed plate. And it's the same thing for the passenger side over here. Alright, now the oil feed on the passenger side again is going to be the 135 that comes off the bottom of that T over there. It's going to come right across the top over the back side of the engine transmission here, and it's going to drop down right over the frame rail here. We can see it coming in, and then it just 90 degrees right there into the turbo itself. So again, we're coming off of the T. The bottom one with the 135 is going to loop off the T, come up over the backside of the engine transmission, and go right to here. And then the top side with the 45 on the short line is going to be the driver's side that's going to come off, just basically over the frame rail and right to the turbo there. Alright, now starting over here on the driver's side, this is going to be the 38 or 36-inch line rather, sorry. It's got a straight and a 90. The straight is going to go right into the bottom of the turbo. It's going to come straight out of there. It's going to route underneath the car here by the exhaust, and it's going to go up inside the transmission tunnel right there to the 90 degree T, and that's going right, or 90 degree right into our T fitting right there, you can see. For the passenger side, this has got the 45-inch line. This has got the 45 on it, and you can see we're kicking it slightly backwards there. That's going to come right down, kind of travel the same path as the driver's side, go up inside the transmission tunnel there, and it's got the same thing on this end. It's got a 90 degree that we're going to drop right into the T. So the T is going to be facing side, and then forward. Now coming out of the front of the T, you can see here, we've got the 30 degree fitting, and this is the 55-inch line. This will be the longest line. And we want the T to kind of face slightly downward like that. What that's going to do is help the oil pool and go into the T and into that line there. Now it's important to note, before this T, these oil lines all have to be sloping downhill. So you can't have a sag and then it come back up. it needs to be sloping downhill all the way until the T. After the T, we can create a suction on it, and then we can have some uphill movement in it. But before the T, it has to be downhill, otherwise the oil is going to back up into the turbos, and it's going to cause smoking out the exhaust. If you got smoking out the exhaust, 99% chance that the oil return has an obstruction in it, or it's going uphill, and the oil is not extracting out of the turbo properly like it should. So from here, I'm going to shoot right up through here, and you can see we're going to hit we're going right above the exhaust here, and we're going to come up right past the motor mount here, you can see. And that's just going to shoot us forward, and the straight side of this 55-inch line goes right into our oil return pump here. Now the -6 line coming from our oil return pump is going to shoot straight up, and that's going to be this line right here. And it comes up and it connects to the 90° to 1/4 inch adapter, and that's going to go right into our oil fill cap here. We're just going to drill and tap the cap. It is 2 layers in there, so it's actually hollow in the middle, so go slow once you go through the first layer so you don't hammer the second layer and risk breaking the cap on it. But basically just drill that out, tap it, screw the fitting in there, and you're good to go. And then we're going to use some sealant on that so that way it seals up, and our 1/4 inch 90° to -6AN fitting is going to fit right in there, and then our line from the pump is going to plug right into there. So what'll happen is the oil is going to drain from both the turbos to the T. From there, the T section, the pump is going to suck it forward and run it through the pump, and then push it through this -6 line right back into the engine. Alright, next we're going to go over some of the electrical wiring and the battery relocation. The battery normally sits up here, and off the positive terminal there is one main large gauge that goes down to the starter itself, and then the smaller one comes up over here to this terminal on the fuse block. So that one provides the car and the fuse assembly its power, and then the big one is going to provide power to the starter during cranking. So what we're going to do is go ahead and cut that off. The one that comes from the starter, we're going to put one of these 0 gauge eyelets on it, and that's going to actually attach right to here. The smaller one that was attached to here, we're going to go ahead and get rid of. And then we're going to attach our 0 gauge wire. That's this big black one here that's going back to the trunk. We're going to attach that there. So what we're effectively doing is creating a junction right here at this terminal. That way our power is coming from the battery back and back. It's going to daisy chain right here. It's going to power up this fuse box, as well as the main original power wire that was going down. And you can see that one right here. And that's going down to the starter. Now for the battery location, what we're going to go ahead and do is just run the 4 gauge wire down. We're going to drop it down up inside of the transmission tunnel. Alright, now looking under the car here. So we're going to come right down the back side of the engine here with the power wire, and that's going to go up inside of our transmission tunnel here. It's easiest just to go ahead and unbolt that, run all the lines that you need to up through there. If you guys are doing the our add-on fuel system, the lines for that will go up in there as well. Then we're going to come right back. You can see our power gauge wire coming through here. We're going to shoot up over the rear end, and then we're going to go after this little cubby hole right here in the back. This is where one of the little compartments is in the trunk, and the battery should actually fit down in there just fine. And we're going to go ahead and drill a couple of holes in there. This one here is our ground. You can see we don't have it hooked up yet. We're going to run our power and ground through there, and we'll show you what that looks like on the top side. And this one here, we're just basically going to ground it anywhere on the frame rail. It's existing bolt hole. When you do that, you do want to make sure you got a good clean ground, so you can use some sandpaper, especially if you're going to like the frame rail here. Anywhere where there's paint, you want to make sure you got a good ground connection on there, and that you're metal on metal with that. Alright, now here you can see we got the cubby hole in the back with the 2 holes pre-drilled in there, and that's where we're going to be running our battery wires. And those are basically just going to come up, and we've included in the kit the top post battery terminals. So when you set the battery in there, we are converting it over to a top post, so if your battery doesn't have both, you will need to get a top post battery. And it's basically just going to sit right down inside this cubby hole and connect up like a normal battery. Alright, now for all the rest of the wiring up here and the ECU wiring, you can see we got it pulled back and we got the ECU pulled out for a second here. We're going to go ahead and zip tie this all up out of the way, keep it back and up off of the turbo. Now for you guys running in hotter climates, or if you're running higher horsepower, you're going to be generating more heat. You may want to heat wrap some of these wires up in here to protect them, but generally with the turbo blanket on the turbo and that, when we have it pulled up this high, it's usually not too big of an issue. Basically all we're after is getting everything to fit up into here, and then once we get done, we have this vanity cover that is going to bolt right up to the front bolt right there, and that is for the hood latch assembly. So we're going to loosen that up, and then this is slotted, so we're going to slide this in, and we'll reach in from the side and tighten it up. But this is going to cover up everything back in this corner here. So we want to kind of get everything to fit up in here, tuck it up out of the way, including the ECU itself here. So what we're going to do is we're going to slide this down inside of here like this, and we'll pack everything in there nice and tight, and then we'll put the cover over the top to kind of protect it and just kind of clean it up so it doesn't look so bad with all of the wiring and the mess of everything back in this corner. Alright, next thing we're going to do is wire up the oil return pump. Now the oil return pump again is mounted to the subframe up front, so we're going to run the wiring right up kind of with this the oil return hose here, and it's going to come right up behind the radiator, and then we're going to come right along this frame rail here and inside the battery terminal box area here where the battery used to sit. We're going to go ahead and wire and mount our relay right here. Now the relay is what's going to trigger and power the oil return pump, and we want it to come on when the ignition switch is in the on position, so when you turn it on and anytime the engine is running. That way when you key it on, engine off, you should still hear the oil return pump. Basic wiring on the relay, for those of you guys that don't know how to wire up the relay or aren't familiar with it, I have a separate video on that showing how to wire the relay and how relays work. Basically we're just going to be using it as an amplifier. So we're going to get our power supply from or for the oil return pump right here. Easiest thing is to tap it into right here off this terminal leg. You guys can tap it and wire it kind of wherever you can get a 12 volt source from. We're going to go ahead and right here is pretty easy. If you do wire it to here, you'll want to use an inline fuse with that. For a trigger source, we're going to actually tap it right into one of the injector wires here. And you can see we've tapped into the pink wire on this. That's going to be our trigger wire to give it its power source. So when you key it on, it triggers the relay, and that triggers the oil return pump. That way it's constantly going whenever the ignition is in the on position. Alright, now you can see we got everything all covered up there. We got it tightened up on here. And then on this side there's going to be two holes. We're going to use two of the sheet metal self-tapping screws, and we're going to just drill those right into the little plastic liner here, and that's going to pull it over. That tucks everything up in this corner so it's nice and clean. Alright, next thing we're going to do is go ahead and replace the fuel injectors. That's pretty simple, straightforward. Just pull the fuel rail off, pop the old injectors out, slide the new ones in, and you're good to go on that. Then that is going to require a recalibration of the ECU, but of course, with doing the turbo, it's going to need to be tuned in that anyway.